Well, I'm glad to be back in the pulpit for today. I'm excited to have a word from the Lord for us this morning. We'll be in Genesis chapter 32 on page 27 in your blue Bible. If you need to, go ahead and navigate there. But I just have to say thank you, Park Community Church. So many of you have been just so encouraging and supporting to us as we were celebrating my grandmother who passed away. Grandma Ruby died at 92 years old, loving Jesus, and a legacy, or just a reminder of how this life is so much more than about us and will outlast and outlive us as we use our influence and impact for others. So thank you for your love and your care for our family. Especially just thank you to my brother, Pastor Eric Targe. I'm just so grateful for you, brother, that God brought you here, and just grateful for your ministry, even as you've been carrying the teaching load this summer, and grateful that I get to be back in the pulpit for today. Hopefully y'all have me back. But we've been celebrating and walking through great stories. If you've been tracking with us through the summer, if you are new and just joining us, we've been just walking through different stories in the Old Testament because they help remind us, they help point us to, in our own stories, how God is at work and how He is present. And this morning, one of the reasons why I'm just so eager to preach this message, it really has to do with what God has been doing here at Park Near North. For many of us as the elders, as we, our leadership team, as we are engaging with you, as we've been talking with you, that there's something that has happened in the atmosphere here at Park Near North. And I might describe it as there's a deep hunger that's happening here. A hunger to know God more, a hunger to obey Him, a hunger to see others come to know Him. There's a hunger to evangelize and share the good news. There's a hunger to follow Him and grow in discipleship. It has been palpable in our conversations in the hallways and in the places in homes and in our small groups. There's a burning desire that seems to has been crescendoing as we've come out of the challenges of the pandemic and the cultural rancor, that there's something about us here that we're serious about following Jesus. We're not playing games. So I'm eager to open up on this passage because as I think about what's ahead of us, and I just have to say, I've never been more excited about what God has in store for us as a church. Those aren't just plan words. Those aren't just vision words. I'm telling you, God is on the move. Jesus said, I will build my church. The gates of hell will not prevail. But as I was preparing for this message, I have to tell you that I had a little bit of like, oh man, you gave me this passage, Lord. And as we open up this passage, I have to tell you that we have this eagerness and this hunger for God to do more in us and through us. There's often a way that God prepares us for those moments of blessing that are coming that we aren't expecting. God's way of preparing us might be not quite what we would desire, might not be what we would expect. And as we open up in Genesis 32, I hope that it will make more sense to you. I'm going to read our passage, Genesis 32, 22 to 32. It's 10 verses. This backdrop of a man named Jacob, and it says that the same night he arose, that's Jacob, and he took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, this man says to Jacob, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. And therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. This morning, we're talking about an encounter where Jacob wrestles with God. Or maybe better yet, an encounter where God wrestles with Jacob. I used to wrestle when I was in high school, and for 2 years. It was because my friend Cardell said, hey, join the wrestling team. And I thought, okay, WWE, I like that. Let's do this. And that's not what it was. And I didn't do well, y'all. I didn't do well. I looked up a lot when I was wrestling. But this is a different kind of wrestling that we're talking about. Have you ever wrestled with God? Or better yet, this morning, can I ask you this question? Has God ever wrestled with you? The background of this story, to help us understand, we got to take some time to understand what's happening to lead up to this moment. Because in some ways, this moment where Jacob is confronted and wrestling with God, it is like the pinnacle of everything that his life has led to. And kind of like when you're watching a movie, I don't know if you're like me, but when I'm watching a movie streaming a movie, sometimes I just want to like get through the movie. Like if I've seen it before, I'll just like, all right, let me just watch it on fast forward. We're going to do that really quickly, okay? So background. This story is taking place in the promised land where God has promised to a man named Abraham, which is Jacob's grandfather, that he is going to, through his offspring, through his family, the entire world, all the peoples of the world are going to be blessed. That there's going to come through him a rescuer, a Messiah, a king who's going to come through this line, that his son and then his son's son and then his son's son's son, that there's going to be a rescuer coming through. This promise is made to Abraham, then to his son Isaac, and then there's a problem. Isaac's wife Rebecca gets pregnant, and she's pregnant with twins. And so the question is, which one of these children are going to be the one who receives the blessing and carry the promise through? If you look at Genesis chapter 25, it should be on the screen, and it gives a little bit of a picture about what's about to happen in the life of this family. It says the children, this is inside of Rebecca, these twins struggled together. You hear that word, struggled together within her. And she said, if it's thus, why is this happening to me? Like, why are these children seemingly fighting, these babies in my womb, in their personhood? Why are they opposed to one another? She inquires of the Lord. He says a few things to her, which is in a way, he's saying this to the entire family, to Isaac and her. He says this, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. And listen to that last line. The older shall serve the younger. God is giving Isaac and Rebekah an answer about who is going to carry the line. The younger will be the one to carry the blessing. Now, they don't know who's going to be born first, but as we fast forward through this and understanding that it was against social custom that the younger would receive the blessing and the larger inheritance and carry on the family name, this is kind of like, whoa, this is not what our culture does. But as the babies are born, the first is named Esau. The second, look at verse 26 in chapter 25. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. If your name is Jacob this morning, I'm just going to let you know, I just got to tell you the truth. But the reason they call him Jacob, they call him Jacob is this word. His name is a way of describing who they see him to be. Jacob means he who holds on to the heel. Another way to describe it is his name was cheater. Imagine when the doctor came out of the delivery room and held up your baby and they said, "Hey, it's Thief Jones. It's Killer Simpson. It's Gossip Carter." That name was a declaration of who Jacob was going to be. A schemer, a manipulator, a cheater. And just for a second, I just wonder how many of us, although we don't have a name like that, how many of us are living in the shadow of names we were given as we've grown up? How many of you are living in an identity that you just ain't good? You're annoying, you're a problem, you're not enough, you're unwanted, you're unloved. Named cheater. So Jacob is born from the very beginning in struggle with his brother, named the manipulator, the schemer, the cheater. And if you fast forward and what happens and look at verse 28, we see that it says Isaac loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now, I know we got a lot of parents in here. How many of y'all have a favorite child? Go ahead and raise your hands up real quick. All right. We got some honest people this morning. I saw 2 hands. The rest of you parents are lying. You know you got favorites. Baby, we love you all the same. All of y'all are equal, but some are more equal than others, you know. All right, so some of y'all are like, man, I had to go to therapy for that. Mom, I know, I wasn't a favorite. That's okay, I still love you. I love you. It's all right. So you might think on the surface, all right, are they just, they have a preference of who their favorite is. Maybe Isaac is like, well, Esau is kind of like a hunter guy. He's kind of like that manly man. He's like the Spartan dude, hair, he's ripped. He's Jack. Jacob is just like hang out in the house. He's watching, cooking shows. So there's a favoritism going on here. But we have to see here, understand that first Isaac as the father who picks a son to be his favorite one, he's picking the son who's not the son of blessing. But secondly, think about what message Jacob received when Isaac said, "This is my favorite." Jacob started his life off with a profound sense of rejection. Some of y'all know that feeling. Now you add a man who has felt like he's rejected, and you add his capability as a schemer, and you got dynamite. You have a man who knows that not only does he have to look out for himself, but he's a man who is capable in his mind to figure out to do whatever he can to get his way. This is Jacob. Now, it's important that we pause for a second, that this story and Jacob's character and the issues of sin in his life actually aren't the primary and first problem that we encounter. We actually have to point to Isaac, because remember, Isaac the father had heard God said, "I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless your offspring." If you look in verse 3 of chapter 26, and I'm going to establish the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. In other words, hey, the younger is going to be the one who receives the blessing. So when Isaac chooses Esau, Isaac isn't just playing favorites. Isaac, in playing favorites, is defying the authority and the will of God. God, I don't like your choice. I'm going to choose what I want. And it has catastrophic consequences in his family. We see this play itself out Fast forward again, several years later, Genesis 27 says, when Isaac was old, and I'm just going to flip through this, I'm going to read the whole thing. He says, he called Esau, his older son, and let's go down to the bottom. He says, hey, go get me some food, bring it to me, that my soul may bless you before I die. Esau is the favorite son. Esau is the son that Isaac, despite knowing what God has said, says, I'm going to choose him. Esau goes out hunting. Isaac, waiting for whatever Esau is going to bring back in a meal, is unaware that Jacob, the schemer, has a plan. Jacob, who has striven and struggled against his brother Esau from the womb. Jacob, who has seen that his brother Esau is the favorite, the one who's chosen. Jacob, who knows that he's supposed to receive the blessing, but it's not happening. Jacob, the schemer, says, I'm going to make this happen the way I can. Deceives his father. His mom helps him, and he pretends to be Esau with Esau's clothes and puts some skins on his, animal skins on his hands so he feels like he's a hairy guy, and brings in some food. And Esau is out hunting, and Isaac gives Jacob the blessing. Then Esau comes home. And Esau finds out, and Esau is furious. Now look what he says in Genesis 27. Isaac says to his son Esau, your brother came, look at that word, deceitfully, because that's who he is, and he has taken away, stolen your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. His anger is so deep. Look what he says in verse 41 of chapter 27. It should be on the screen. It says, Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing. And then it says, when the days of mourning for my father are approaching, when my father dies, I am going to kill my brother. So now what does Jacob have to do? His brother's an expert hunter. His brother is a superior athlete. His brother is superior in all ways physically. So Jacob has to take off and run. Again, this is all leading to this cataclysmic moment as Jacob is going to encounter and wrestle with God. And so Jacob runs away and has to live a life. And it's interesting if you look at the time when Jacob runs away, how he is engaging and encountering and interacting with God. You see this in a snippet in chapter 28, verse 20 and 21, when Jacob makes a vow. He says, if God will be with me, if God will keep me, if God will give me bread to eat, and if God will give me clothing to wear, look at this word at the last end, then the Lord shall be my God. What I want you to see here is that Jacob, the schemer, the manipulator, the negotiator, he is interacting and relating with God as a negotiation. That God, look, if you do this for me, I'm going to do this for you. It's a transactional relationship. He's religious in the sense of acknowledging God and who he is, but the way in which he relates is, I do for you and you do for me. And can we all be honest this morning? That's exactly how many of us relate with him. We'll sing the worship songs, Jesus, I will follow you, I'll do what you say to do, but Jesus, you better come through. Jesus, you better get me a man. Jesus, you better provide me a wife. Jesus, you better provide me with that get accepted into that program and that graduate program. Jesus, you better make sure that I get that promotion at work. Jesus, you better make sure that my family treats me correctly. Jesus, you better provide friends for me, because Jesus, I did my part, you better do yours. You know what I call that kind of a faith? That's a Chuck E. Cheese faith. Chuck E. Cheese. I played the game, give me the tickets. Come on, y'all. Some of y'all, you know what I'm talking about. You got a Chuck E. Cheese faith. The pizza's terrible, but the prizes are great. Chuck E. Cheese faith won't carry you. Park near North for what the blessing that God has for us and wants to work through us. Chuck E. Cheese faith ain't going to take us there.
That's right.
So what happens? We fast forward. Jacob's mother has died. He has a family, he has wives, he has several kids, he has wealth. He's a self-made man, successful by every measure, but there is a problem. He does not have access to the blessing that was promised to him. And the one person, the one problem standing in the way of his receiving all of that blessing that was supposed to be his in the land and the future that would come is a man named Esau, his brother. So what is he going to do about the problem of Esau? What's he going to do? It says in Genesis 32, chapter 3, verse 3 and 5, it basically says, look, I'm going to send some of my messengers to Esau and tell them, hey, I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants, female servants. I have been sent to tell my lord Esau, tell him that I might find favor in your sight. What's he doing right there? Jacob is still scheming. If I can just tell him, look, I'm wealthy, I got it made. Hey, Esau, no need to worry. When I'm coming home, I have all I need. You don't have to be threatened by me. Chill, don't kill. But Esau doesn't buy it. His servants tell him that, hey, look, there's 400 men that Esau has gathered, and these men are likely well armed and angry, and they are coming. And Jacob and all of his family, they're helpless. And in verse 7 and 8, it says, Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. So he divides his camp up. Hey, if Esau attacks one, then the other group can get away. And he's on edge. He's anxious. And he at that moment, he cries out to God in verse 11 of chapter 32, please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him. It doesn't say that Jacob waited for God to answer. But what he does from that is that he determines that he's going to send a big old fat present. He is going to rain down money and wealth on Esau to try to appease him. Jacob is still trying to use any means necessary to gain the outcome that he has determined that he wants for his life. He says, hey, as I send this stuff, tell him that these are a present sent to my lord Esau. Like, hey, Esau, look, this is for you. He's trying to manipulate Esau. And he goes a step further after he sends on those gifts. And it says that he arose, he took his wives and his kids and his children, and he crossed the ford of Jabbok. And he took them, and it says he sent them across the stream and everything else he had. And look at the first part of verse 24, where everything in his life has led to this moment. And Jacob was left alone. Jacob was left alone. He sends them on the other side of the stream. He apparently in his mind, he is determined that he has got to face this, his greatest struggle. He's got to face this, his greatest problem. He's going to face down this consummate problem in his life in the name of the man Esau. This defining struggle that was inhibiting his life, he has to face it. And there's something in him where if he's facing Esau alone, that he recognizes that if he doesn't prevail, that he's going to die. Esau was his biggest problem. Esau was the biggest hindrance to the blessing that was supposed to be his near north. At least that's what Jacob thought. Jacob thought that the biggest hindrance, his biggest problem, was something outside of him. But isn't God good? So what happens? It says in verse 24, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now, that was a very quick sentence, but this idea, this mysterious person comes out of nowhere who Jacob is not expecting, and they engage in a struggle. This word wrestle is like they're literally fighting for their lives. This is not WWF. This is not wrestling in sports. They are fighting to the death. And nothing is held back. All of his strength he's expending, fighting fiercely, and neither of them would win. Jacob would not yield, and neither would this mysterious figure. And we start to get a clue of who this mysterious figure is as we look at what happens in Verse 25, it says, when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Up to this point, Jacob is thinking that he is wrestling against a mere man, toe to toe. But this man says, it said, the scripture uses the word, he touched him. This was not he yanked him. It's not that he threw Jacob and somehow he fell. This is not Bo Jackson playing for the Raiders, falling down, dislocating his hip. It says he touched him and his hip came out of joint. Anybody had a dislocated finger ever before? You yelling and hollering and screaming for a finger. Imagine the pain in your hip. And this is what happens. Jacob is reeling in pain, and he recognizes, whoa, this person touched me. There's got to be a supernatural element here, a divine power that has disabled me as my leg is now in pain and literally paralyzed. And it's interesting that something happens in Jacob when this man, this mysterious man, touches him and puts him in pain with his hip. And we see this. He says, look, let me go, for the day has broken. This man says to Jacob, but Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What I want you to see here is that Jacob, in desiring and asking and clawing and clinging to this man to bless him, Jacob recognizes that the thing that is the most painful in his life is not his biggest problem. His pain isn't actually the problem. He needs something from this man because he's recognizing that this is a divine person. This is a supernatural person. And he's determined that he's going to cling to him until he receives the blessing. Now think about this. They are locked head to head, back and forth, and the man touches Jacob and disables his hip. Now what this indicates is Jacob in that moment, it's like when I used to wrestle with my boys. They're sitting on the front row and now they're bigger and more muscular. And I remember when they were 6 and 7 years old, they remember Gabe and Drew, when I had this thing where I'm like, all right, I'm gonna teach them how to wrestle. And you know, dads, we like wrestle and we're like wrestling, but it's like, they're like, ah, and you're like, flunk. But I remember, you guys remember, we were like, all right, y'all can go full power. I was like, you can do whatever you want. And they actually kind of hurt me, actually. We didn't do that again. Yeah. Scratching me up in the eyes. My eyes are swollen. My wife's like, what's wrong with your lips? Anyway, sad story. When Jacob is encountering this person, this divine person, he thinks he has the strength to overcome him, and it's toe-to-toe, 50-50. But when he gets touched, he's disabled. He recognizes, I'm wrestling with someone who is infinitely more powerful than I am. He's resisting the one who has all power. And Jacob recognizes that that is his greatest problem. You see, what's happening in Jacob's heart right here in his mind is that as he is now encountering who, as we find out that this is God in human form, who has come in some way, can't explain it all, doesn't make all sense, but he comes in human form to engage and confront Jacob. Jacob, his entire life, has thought that his biggest problem is Esau. Esau's the one who I've had to struggle with. Esau's the one who I've had to fight with and have had to try to get what I need in order to live the life of blessing that is called to me. And yet God reveals to him, and wrestling with him is that, Jacob, Esau is not your problem. Jacob, your problem is that you have been resisting me. And the same thing is true for us, Near North. In a world falling apart with all of the issues and problems and brokenness and all of the hurts and hangups, our biggest hindrance for what God will do is not what's out there, it's our resistance to his will. And he loves us too much to leave us alone. Amen. Now look what happens. Jacob in verse 30 calls it Peniel. He says, I've seen the face of God. And so we know that this person is God who he's wrestling with. But look at verse 27. He said to him, that is the God who's wrestling in this human form, wrestling with Jacob, says, what is your name? And Jacob says, it's Jacob. Now is it because as God's wrestling with Jacob that somehow that God's like, I don't know who I'm wrestling with? Gabriel. My notepad. No, he's not asking a question because he doesn't know. He is asking a question to confront Jacob. He's asking this question: who are you? Who are you? A man who cheats? Who has to manipulate to get your own way, who has to violate your own ethics or other ethics to get what is yours? See, when Jacob says his name is Jacob, when that was given to him as a child, that name was an identity. It was a destiny. It was his future. It was an identity that marked him, and ultimately it was an identity that would fail him. Jacob is forced to confront who he is. But isn't God good? In wounding Jacob and taking from him his strength, forcing him to confront himself and who he is, isn't God so good and gracious that he doesn't leave Jacob there? He gives him a new name. Look what he does. He says, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. He goes from saying, Jacob, no longer are you the cheater, no longer are you the manipulator, no longer are you the schemer, and yielding yourself to my strength and yielding your life in my hands and yielding your will to mine to do things my way, to receive blessing through what I have declared. You are now the one who prevails. And some of you need to hear that this morning. You've been walking in an identity that has not carried you far enough. You've been walking in an identity that does not give you what you need for what God has for you. I don't know what you might call yourself. It might be what your accomplishments are. It might be what you do for your job. It might be the size of your bank account. It might be who your friends are, your social status. And I have to tell you, it's not going to carry you. You need a new name. God changes his name and gives him a new identity. And Jacob very clearly receives that name, indicating a heart of repentance, that he's turning from that past identity to receive who God has called him to be. And in this, God has great plans for him and blesses him. Do you all see this? That God in his kindness wounded Jacob so he could heal him. I'm looking out, and I know some of your stories. That some of the deepest and darkest moments in your life, where you thought everything in your life had fallen apart, where you thought you were abandoned and alone, and in that moment, God met you. He met you. He gave you a name and a purpose that nothing can take from you. Tim Keller says it this way: God has to wrestle us into a transformed life rather than comfort us into one. When God's presence comes into your life, full of selfishness, with his love, full of power, with your anxiety, there is going to be a clash. I love what Charles Spurgeon says about this. Bearded preacher in the early 1900s. He says the wrestling was to take all of his strength out of him, and when his strength was gone, then God called him prince and prevailer. That is his usual way of working. He makes you hungry before he feeds you. He strips you before he robes you. So near north, as we seek the blessing of God to move and work through us as a church, my question for us is, what are we wrestling with God over? Or better yet, what is God wrestling with us over? What are you clinging to, hoping it's going to deliver you? What are you holding on to protect you, to provide for you, to fulfill you, to satisfy you? I believe that we have blessing in front of us. I believe that the blessing of God is not just it's not us being comfortable. It's not us experiencing wide success. The blessing of God is his presence. The blessing of God is him in his kindness, granting us the privilege to work and partner with him. The question this morning is, are we ready to receive it? Are we ready to receive it? Our life's greatest problem is not our fight against external things. It's our resistance to trust him. And so this morning I'm imploring us to trust him. Maybe for the first time for some of you, your whole life has led to this moment, to trust in Jesus and what he's done for you. Maybe as a believer, as a follower of Jesus, as a disciple, you've lost hope. You said, look, I'm deconstructing. I don't know if I believe this anymore. Maybe this morning I have to ask you this. Maybe you're not deconstructing. Maybe God is deconstructing you. Maybe he's trying to take down your transactional relationship with him so that your heart is attuned to a deep love for him that is built on nothing more than who he is, not because of what other people do for you or don't do for you. So how do we do this? Why would we trust a God who wounds us? The writer in Philippians, Apostle Paul, says this, talking about Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant. And being born in the likeness of men and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. You see, what God is calling us into, Jesus is calling us into to follow him is something that he has already led the way. He was emptied so we could be filled. He was wounded so we could be healed. He was shamed so we could be honored. And not because we did something for him, but because he loved us. And this is the God who we worship, the same God who struck Jacob and hurt Jacob and wounded Jacob to bless him is the same God at work now. This is our God. So let's choose to trust him near north, not resist him. Let's choose to believe and receive from him the blessing that he has for us, his people. Because he's worthy. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, we are your people. We are the sheep of your pasture. We belong to you. And even as you have demonstrated your care for us and giving us these stories to point us and remind us of our desperate need for you, our desperate need to trust in you and not resist you. God, this morning we receive the identity that you've given us, that we are your sons and your daughters. We trust you even in our wounds, that they are for our good. God, you're the same God. We can trust you. You've been faithful to us in the past, and you'll be faithful to us in the future. We love you. We trust you. In Jesus'